everybody. We're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
I'm Dr. Kristen.
And we're back with our continuing coverage for Black History Month. Last video, we talked about our love of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and some of our favorite characters of color and some movies you should look out for. And this week, we're kind of taking a step back from something specific to do with actors of color or creatives of color, and talking more generally about the experience of Black Hollywood. And that is because we found a documentary that just premiered on Netflix in the US that was first created in 2018 by BBC Two in the UK called Black Hollywood, They've Gotta Have Us. And I heard about it on Twitter because it's being distributed through Netflix by Ava DuVernay's production company, Array Now. And I obsessively follow anything on Twitter that has to do with Ava, and thus found it out. So it's 3 episodes, about an hour each episode, chronicling the journey of characters of color, specifically Black actors in Hollywood. In Hollywood and in film. Pretty much exclusively film. Yeah, they don't
talk about television. No.
They don't talk about television. They have some television actors, but
if they were going to talk about television and they didn't talk about Shonda Rhimes, I would have burned this thing to the ground. So yeah.
So we watched all 3 episodes, and we want to talk to you about it because it was a fascinating documentary series. I learned so much, but we also both have some pretty important questions and comments about what the documentary did cover and what the documentary didn't cover. It's really important to note that it was produced in 2018, even though it's being distributed internationally in 2020, because it kind of ends on this upswing of the recognition of Black art and Black creatives, with Moonlight winning Best Picture, Black Panther coming out and being nominated for Oscars, even though they don't mention that yet in the documentary. It seems to be made before that. And we've kind of swung back down in terms of at least Oscar recognition of films made by people of color. Even though Parasite did win Best Picture this year, there's still not a lot of acting nominations happening in the last 2 years of the Oscars. So that's very important to know before you watch it, if you haven't watched it yet. Because they certainly end on a high note, and I was just like, oh, I feel bad because the Oscars let you down the next 2 years.
And there's a couple of things in this. Like, one, artistically, it's kind of an awkward sit because he makes some really weird editing choices. That's a little bit whiplashy. He takes as assumption that the Academy Awards are the arbiter of this, and I would argue that and box office numbers, and it's a much more complicated. If he had titled it Hollywood Awards, then this would have felt like a more cohesive narrative.
And they dealt with, they showed graphics next to people when they were talking about specific films in terms of how much it cost
the money
and how much money it made. But they didn't really delve into it except with Black Panther. And with Black Panther, they did 5 minutes on it. Don Cheadle had a great line that was Black Panther showed us that the only color they care about is green. And it did so well that now all of a sudden they want to make 7 Black Panthers. But that was early on in the first episode, and then they kind of dropped it, and it became more about award recognition.
And it was odd, so we have Don Cheadle, and there's no conversation about Hotel Rwanda, which is, there's no conversation about his role in the Ocean's movies, which is a big, so it was kind of, it was all, to me, it just felt a little bit half-assed. So it's a good, I would recommend it as a sit if you don't know anything. If I say the name Harry Belafonte and you don't know who that is, this is a good 3 hours.
It's a good primer. I definitely learned things I didn't know about the evolution of Black creatives and the films that they make, and the influence of hip-hop. And, I learned more about Spike Lee than I knew.
And John Singleton. I didn't realize that Boys in the Hood was written almost in direct reaction to Do the Right Thing. So
and Juice. That was so interesting too. So even for the Dr. Kristen and I who study and film a lot and pay a lot of attention to the film industry, we learned stuff. But it was really I kept wanting them to follow up with things they had let people start.
Yeah, it felt like a lot of dropped threads.
Yeah.
So there's, for me, there's a couple different categories of this. So I really loved talking to Harry Belafonte about the fact that the Hayes Law with the MPAA was that blacks and whites couldn't be in romantic relationships on screen.
Right.
So a couple things to just notice that Hayes didn't say people of color, didn't say Asian people, didn't say, Hayes was definitively black and white racist.
Yeah.
And Hayes cast a shadow over the MPAA that is still there in a lot of ways. He's one of the reasons the MPAA is so incredibly conservative when it comes to sex as well.
MPAA stands for?
I'm sorry, the Motion Picture Association of America. They are the ones that decide what the rating is of your movie.
Yeah.
So which was a hilarious conversation with Robert Townsend
about the
Eddie Murphy Raw movie.
Documentary. Oh my God, that was the funniest part of the whole thing, was this conversation negotiating swear words. Yeah. For the Eddie Murphy stand-up special. That was genius. But.
Yeah. And so related in this people of color thing is also a real fear on behalf of the MPAA of showing sex.
Yeah.
And showing the human sexuality, which if that's not something that you've encountered before, we'd really recommend this documentary, This Movie Is Not Yet Rated, which we'll link in the show notes, which explains a little bit more of why Hollywood is completely okay showing us decapitations and things blowing up, and a lot less okay with showing us with showing people kissing.
Right.
And so that relationship of interracial relationships on screen, because then we pick up with Oelio and Rosamund Pike's beautiful movie later on, A Better Kingdom, and we don't cover that there's this real evolution, but there's still not a lot of interracial relationships on screen.
Right.
Like, remember, was it Loving was the one about the Virginia couple that starred Joel Edgerton?
Yes.
We didn't cover that. Like, there's a couple, if you're going to talk about the history of sex scenes, of relationships, of dating,
right,
and of coconut drinking, meaning having sex, you got to hit more of the points along the way.
Like, I don't know if it was a limitation of time. Like, maybe BBC Two said you have 3 hours.
But what we know about BBC is that's probably not how it happened.
That's probably not how it happened, because the BBC loves a good documentary.
Lord, do they.
And especially BBC Two, because they have a little bit more leeway for that kind of stuff. I could have seen them really doing 6 episodes of it. Because then you're talking, they only hit on, brief elements of aspects of this. So like, again, like interracial and stereotypical roles, like Driving Miss Daisy. Like, how did we spend all of this time?
How did we not talk to Morgan Freeman?
Mentioned Morgan Freeman. Literally 3 hours. I just realized this right now as we're filming. Never mentioned Morgan Freeman, who in the 1990s is cast as the president of the United States in Deep Impact.
Also God.
And God. Yeah, but like, you want to talk about actors like Denzel Washington who were able to find roles outside of stereotypical imagined spaces for Black people. Like, hello, Morgan Freeman.
And then speaking about the other threads they lost, so my other category is that we really don't talk about women of color. So what really got me is that there was absolutely no mention of Hidden Figures.
Yeah, was Hidden Figures after the documentary? Was Hidden Figures 20?
Nope, because when Lupita wins one of the things they showed
was Lupita winning, but
Lupita winning, and that was the same year that they were all nominated for Hidden Figures.
Double checking.
Or the year after it. We definitely saw.
What did Lupita win for, though?
Lupita won for 12 Years a Slave.
Yeah, Hidden Figures was 2016.
Yeah, so let's real quick just talk about the only time that women of color win Oscars is to play slaves or maids. But we can.
Because didn't Octavia Spencer win for Hidden Figures, or she won?
Either she won for Hidden Figures or somebody did.
Octavia Spencer,
or it wasn't Janelle.
No, Octavia Spencer won, but I don't know if it was for Hidden Figures or something else. We're going slightly tangential here, but
sorry.
Absolutely no, you're 100% right. And
that really bothered me. I couldn't imagine how we got to a 2018 documentary and didn't talk about Hidden Figures. Wow. And didn't talk about The Help.
So what? Yeah, I mean, vaguely, who did they talk about with
They talked about Secret Life of Bees, which is a beautiful movie.
Oh, Yellow talked about his role in The Help.
In The Help, but he just mentioned it. Also, we classed right over the Butler and Forrest Whitaker.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the critiques that we have about this, obviously, is the lack of discussion about women of color and their roles. I mean, we talk about Hattie McDaniels. We have a lovely bit with Diane Warren. Not Diane Warren.
No, Diane Carroll.
Diane Carroll.
Who has recently passed. So the late Diane Carroll.
But a lot of it was in relationship to the Black men as well, which is.
Yeah, like I didn't, like, I want all time with Diane Carroll. She's one of the reasons I started watching White Collar, because I love Diane Carroll so much. And watching her and Matt Bomer, like, together was a gift. But, like, I knew about Sidney Poitier. Like, I didn't need to know that that's why she wasn't at the Oscars. Like, she was a revelation in and of herself. Like, why was I introduced to her via Sidney Poitier? Like, it was just very...
Yeah, and the women that they had, a lot of the women creatives, producers and directors, were introduced in relation to John Singleton or in relation to Spike Lee most prominently.
And that might be true for some of them, but it felt like such a pattern. Like,
yeah. And
it, like...
It
felt like this was told by a man to men.
Yeah, and for me, we just talked about this offline, but like, I don't know the evolution of when this documentary got picked up by Array Now, and kind of signed off on by Ava DuVernay, because I literally found out about it because she was tweeting about it premiering on Netflix. So she has assigned herself to this production now. And they spend a good bit of time on her 2014 movie Selma. And
a good bit of time.
Which I love. I learned some really interesting things about. I did not know she was like the 7th director to come on board. I am not at all surprised that she rewrote the script, centering it on Dr. King instead of LBJ, because
also that she's the one who inserted Coretta into the narrative, which for me is my favorite parts of Selma, is the insertion of Coretta. So I was really glad we covered Dr. King's infidelities.
But that story was told through David Oyelowo. So I don't know, maybe it's entirely possible that Ava DuVernay was not available when he was filming for this. Like, and she just couldn't be involved. Like, I totally recognize that as a possibility. It was just really, really weird to have her company distribute this for Netflix, to have her talked about so lovingly and so importantly as a woman of color, as a director. We didn't talk about A Wrinkle in Time.
That came out after this. No, it wasn't, because it was on Oelio's filmography.
Yeah. So we didn't talk about A Wrinkle in Time and her centering of narratives of women of color, and her casting of women of color in A Wrinkle in Time. We didn't talk about 13th and her role in centering narratives of criminal injustice and mass incarceration, which she is a firm advocate for. I understand they weren't going to talk about When They See Us because that happened after this film. But like, all these opportunities, you want to bring up Ava DuVernay, and we could have talked about a lot of things about her, but it was through what story David Oyelowo wanted to tell about Ava DuVernay.
So all of this is problematic, obviously, but there are a couple real highlights that I want to cover, at least for me. So one of them was hearing Ruth Carter talk about Black Panther and the process of creating the costumes for Black Panther, which is there's a Black Panther like published book out there that I've been meaning to get forever, because it goes into where her tribal inspirations and the idea of Afrofuturism. But one of the points that somebody made about that movie that I thought was great, and I can't remember who it was, but that was because the entire cast was Black except for Morgan Freeman. You were allowed to have the full human experience within the cast. Like, you could have an evil Black guy, you could have a funny Black guy, you could have you could kind of go, because once everybody's Black, no one's Black.
Yeah.
And I thought that was fascinating, because we get that privilege all the time.
All the time, yeah.
As Jackson from Grey's Anatomy brought up so perfectly, that we get to make movies about cats reminding us of our mothers.
Yeah, Jesse Williams definitely had my favorite line in the second episode, where he said, there should be roles for Black folks that are not always about Blackness.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, because white people get to do that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And he is 100% right. And so, that in the episode Black Film is Not a Genre was so interesting. Just like,
yes,
we have othered this entire group of people, and that, you know, systematically is the founding of our country, is othering, particularly Black people. So we other everything that they're in. So it's always a category as opposed to just the human experience. And white people get the privilege of just living the human experience. That for me was like encapsulated so well. And he was amazing about it. He was like, yeah, because white people make a movie about how they lost their dog and it reminded them of their mother, and it's terrible. And that's okay, because we should all get to make our art. But like, we should all get to make our art.
Make our art.
Yeah. Which was such a wonderful, I think, theme for the whole thing that he did tap into.
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
We should all get to make our art. And it's been really hard. And we've had a lot of people fight a lot of injustice to get to make our art. But then for me at the end, when I forget who was talking about it, one of the Black women was saying, you know, the work is deeper now that we're doing. And I love that line.
I think it was Jill Scott. I think that was Jill Scott.
Jill Scott. The work we're doing is deeper now.
Yeah.
It's more layered. It's nuanced. We've got complex humanity on display for Black people. And the work is deeper. So I thought those were my two biggest like highlight takeaways.
I was also fascinated with the discussion over Color Purple and the idea of Steven Spielberg being somebody who clearly was an ally and who opened up this door and who was intentional about it and who knew that his name was going to get that movie made when like no one else was going to get that movie made. Talk about allyship and how you can spend your social capital to then hear the NAACP telling people to boycott it was really interesting. In my mind too, I always think that Color Purple won a ton of Oscars. Because it didn't, but I always think it did, because I was raised in the theater world that I grew up in being told that Color Purple was a masterpiece.
Yeah, and it is, and like, it's so, for me, that was fascinating. I had no idea. And the fact that Whoopi Goldberg attributes the stunting of a lot of actors of color's careers because they were in that movie and it didn't win awards. And she was like, all of these people's careers were impacted.
Like, I was fine, but I was lucky. Like,
I was the exception. And arguably Oprah as well, although Oprah was then also became
Oprah's her own category.
A TV personality as well.
Yeah,
that was fascinating to me. And the other part that I really thought was interesting, but also kind of problematic, because we haven't said yet that the filmmaker who made this is a Black British
gentleman, yes.
So the last episode for me was really interesting, if slightly problematic, because it looked at this dynamic between Black British actors and Black American actors and the roles that they play. And we get this whole discussion about David Oyelowo playing Dr. Martin Luther King, and having Black British actors play American historical figures, again, which would have been a great opportunity to talk about Hidden Figures and how we cast all Black American actors to play these.
Yeah, Taraji P. Henson was nominated for Hidden Figures as well.
Yeah. And we cast 3 American Black women to play these 3 American Black figures, not discussed. But yeah, this whole idea of Britishness and Americanness.
And pain and genetic pain was the phrase people kept using, which was fascinating.
Like, maybe it's easier to cast a Black British actor to play Dr. King for the person playing Dr. King and for the audience. Like, fascinating. Not sure how I feel about it. Because I also understand, like, Sam Jackson's outrage that a Black American actor was not cast. I understand where his sentiment was coming from, 100%. So yeah,
and I remember, because at one point Michael B. Jordan was connected to the project.
Well, I was just thinking when we were talking offline, like, could you imagine if Michael B. Jordan played Dr. King?
So he was attached to it at one point, and then they decided that it was gonna, so I remember this like in Hollywood gossip, like in reading gossip blogs, but they decided it was gonna focus a little bit on his older career. So they needed somebody a little bit older than Michael B. Jordan.
Yeah. 100%.
And then I was like thinking to myself, oh, then Cheadle should do it. Like, wouldn't that be fascinating? Cheadle could bring this gravitas and like this. And then I heard David Oyelowo, who like I knew was British, and this is before Ava was attached. And I just remember thinking, oh, I'm not seeing that.
Yeah, and I love Oyelowo. I think he's fantastic.
I do too. And now that I have seen the movie, he was incredible, and I'm really glad I saw it. But I remember my immediate first instinct was this story belongs to African Americans, not Black British men.
Yeah.
And for right or for wrong, that was my first instinct.
And I think part of it too is like he looks a lot more like Dr. King than I think some other people, which isn't as important. But yeah, it was a really fascinating discussion to have in the last episode. I think they spent a little bit too much time celebrating Black British male actors, even though I am obsessed with and love John Boyega, and I loved every second we got with John Boyega. I was still like, yeah, where's Lupita Nyong'o? Like, where's other women of color who are British actors right now?
Where's Tandy Newton?
Yeah, she's having kind of a renaissance with West.
But also, like, she was a movie star, she sold Mission Impossible movies. Like,
and I love that story, and I'm not going to remember your man's name. Cameron, maybe? It's not David Cameron, because that's the Prime Minister. Who was the actor in Blood Diamond, and how he talked about, like...
Oh, David Haywood, who's also on 24.
Yes.
Harewood, on 24.
Yeah. I loved his discussion about, like, inserting himself into Blood Diamond and, like, being a Black British actor. And
not 24, he's not on 24, sorry. But yeah.
Yeah, but, like, all of that was fascinating to me, kind of the racism in the UK versus racism in the United States. Loved it. At the end, I would just like to say, just more ladies, please.
That's going to drive me nuts what he's in now, because I can see him as like a CIA person.
Yeah, because he said he played the director of the CIA.
Yeah, it's going to drive me nuts now.
Do you want me to look it up on IMDb?
Yeah. I think it was one of those things in which it's a great starting point. Like, you used the word primer when we were at some point earlier in this, or when we were offline, and I think that's really true. But it presents itself as kind of the whole story.
Yeah.
Which is a mistake. Homeland. Gosh, we got there. I knew he was the director of the CIA.
Yes.
It needs amendments.
Yes.
It needs amendments, like most things do, but it's a really complicated story. If you've never thought about this, again, if I say, Harry Belafonte, and you don't know who that is, this is a great 3-hour sit to start. We're certainly going to take this and try to find some more resources about other stories that we can hear. We're certainly going to sit down and watch some more Spike Lee movies than we've watched, and maybe we'll talk about them with you guys.
Yeah, it's definitely for me, like, a reminder that there's a lot more for me to learn. And I know we both said we came away with a lot of thoughts and a lot of questions.
Yeah, I would love to talk, like, no, we didn't address the Tyler Perry of it all. And if there was an American making this, we would have talked about Tyler Perry.
Yeah, a little bit. And I mean, we spent a lot of time on Jordan Peele.
Which, can we spend more time on Jordan Peele all the time? And his transition from Key and Peele as a sketch show to an Oscar-winning,
And they mentioned, like, Tyler Perry was kind of a throwaway when they were talking about Black film not being a genre. But there's a lot, there's just a lot we didn't talk about. So we would like much, much more. Particularly, I think it's really interesting to go on top of, like, the Jordan Peele of it all and the amazing success that Get Out was, like, in the box office, and then recognized for so many nominations at a lot of different award ceremonies, and then to have Us come out this year.
And everyone talked about how Lupita deserved a nomination.
And to get all of this critical acclaim and to get all this box office success and not have it translated. I kind of want an addendum to this documentary, because I feel like what a lot of people would say is, oh, no, we recognize Jordan Peele once.
Yeah.
We nominated him once, that's fine.
Yeah, he's good.
He's good. Never mind the fact that Scarlett Johansson got nominated twice in the same category this year. So that's just a little bit of the continuing story that is happening with these nominations that I think is really interesting and also problematic. And
we'd be remiss if we didn't say, we have a lot of friends who identify as people of color who are not Black or African American, that the continual problem that Hollywood has of eliding entire groups of non-white people into the same statistic.
Yeah.
Which now this was specifically about Black Hollywood, so this documentary wasn't ever going to address that, and probably shouldn't have. But we would be remiss to not bring that up in our conversation about things like Parasite winning, and Awkwafina not being nominated, because these are big, broader issues than just Black and white Hollywood.
100%. Yeah, 100%.
So and on that note, if you haven't seen The Farewell, please see The Farewell. And we'll keep talking about movies, and we'll keep asking questions, and we hope you do too.
Yeah, next week we will be back. Our next Black History Month video, we're going to be talking about more about historical dramas and the representation of people of color and their stories. So Hidden Figures and lots of other historical stories next week. Which any chance we get to talk more about the brilliance of Hidden Figures, we will take and run with. So we will see you all then. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.